I was the OG work from home guy because we didn't have an office in LA, and I was working from home.
You were the future of work before it was even.
I was the future of work. Video stores, yogurt, and work from home.
What would happen if we just told the truth?
Welcome to TruthWorks, where we dig into the nitty-gritty of leadership and work.
And what needs to change. I'm Jessica Neal.
And I'm Patty McCord.
Our journey together started in HR, but trust us, it's evolved into something wild, honest, and, well, a bit rebellious.
So throw out the handbook. We're here to redefine rules to work for us, not against us.
Let's dive into another episode. Hey, welcome to another episode of TruthWorks. I'm here with Patty McCord, of course, but today we are with a very, very dear special guest, Ted Sarandos, who we both know incredibly well, and he's amazing, and we're so happy to have you. Patty, anything you want to say?
Love you!
Yay! I'm glad to be on your podcast.
And it feels so good. Yeah.
Speaking of that, okay, I have to tell my TED meeting story.
Yeah.
So you're talking about the first day we met?
Yeah. So we had everybody in the company in one place where I think the capacity was 50 people, but we had like 150 people in there. And Ted and I were done and we were waiting for Reed. And Ted's son was about to go to a dance, his first dance. And so I was like, oh God, remember your first dance. So we start singing Disco Duck, which was maybe the song that played at one of our dances. And we were disco dancing. And Reed came up. He's like, oh, I see you've met.
This is an interview, by the way. This is an interview.
You're interviewing. You're Disco Ducking. I don't even know that song. What is that song?
We were waiting for the next interview, and we didn't know he'd show up and be all Reed.
Yeah.
So
this was early Netflix, where you had to be interviewed by 80% of the population.
That's right.
To get a job.
That's right.
Until I got there and changed all that. What is Disco Duck? I don't know this song.
Disco Duck.
Was it a good one? Like, was it a hit?
No, it was terrible song. No.
Terrible song. My high school dance song that was Michael Jackson, I Want to Rock With You.
That's a good one.
Because I'm not a good dancer, but that's an easy one. You can.
Oh, come on. You got the signature moves. So Ted, I've been to a number of events with Ted and his family, and many of them aren't with us anymore. But what they left us behind, Ted's dad and his brother Joey, was the signature move, which we can't show you on podcasts, but we still know how to do it.
You have to trust us. It's a quality dance.
It's a quality move. Yeah, it's a quality move.
Gosh. Well, Ted, we're so grateful to have you. So thank you. And we love you and have missed you. But you have a fascinating story that Patty and I know. But we want our listeners to know your story and know you. So tell us how you came to be.
Yeah, it's a pretty unlikely path to CEO of a giant media company. But for me, I grew up in Phoenix, Arizona. I guess lower middle class kind of upbringing. And I would say education was not paramount for my parents. I was one of 5 kids. My parents were young parents. By the time they were in their 20s, they had 4 kids. Mm-hmm. So they were mostly busy, feeding and working and all those things. And as you'd expect, I was a pretty lousy student. I was growing up in Phoenix, and in that house with all those kids and all the young parents, it's pretty chaotic. So for me, I found like a lot of peace and comfort in television. And I used to watch a lot of television. And I'd park myself in front of a TV. And the beauty of not having hardcore disciplinarian parents is I stayed up all night watching TV. So again, back into why I was not such a great student. I was probably exhausted all the time. But for me, like the life inside that box was so much more attractive than the life outside that box. Mm-hmm. I found that film and television would be very kind of transformative and somewhat comforting and somewhat educational and all those things that, for me, I thought I had a very important relationship with entertainment. The good side of my mom being really horrible with money, I always think that we were poor, but really my mom was just really horrible with money. And, and so we would always have gadgets and entertainment things. Like the blessing I got from her was this gift that she would squander our money on these things like a little tiny satellite dish to get HBO or a VCR when at the time there was no reason to have a VCR. It was about the size of this room and it was really expensive and there was no video stores at the time even when we got this when she bought it. And keep in mind now, we barely have the electricity on most
I was
of the
going to
time.
say, but cheaper than a babysitter for 5 kids.
True.
Yeah,
True.
right.
So I'm sure that was probably part of the motivation.
Uh-huh.
But by some kind of complete fluke, the second video store in the state of Arizona opened up around the corner from our house. And I went in there. I had enough money to buy a blank tape, and that's what I did. But I noticed like there were like 900 movies in there. Every kind of hodgepodgey weird thing because the studios didn't release their movies yet.
Yeah.
And there was this guy behind the counter named Dale Mason, who was a former air traffic controller at O'Hare Airport in Chicago, wearing a velvety tracksuit, sitting behind the counter of this little tiny store. And I just struck up a conversation with him like I do. And I found out he had hated his job as an air traffic controller. It's too high pressure. And he had read in a magazine somewhere that video stores and yogurt shops were going to be the next big thing in the 80s. And he said, I hate yogurt and I love movies. So he sold everything in Chicago, saved up enough money, moved to Arizona and opened a video store. And I used to go in there and hang out and talk to him all the time and move the boxes around. And we just talked about movies all the time. It was just such a cool connection. And I was finishing high school, just started at Glendale Community College. And I needed a part-time job and he needed help because the business was great. So my part-time job was working in that video store while I was sometimes going to community college and editing the college newspaper. Between those three things, none of which I did great, that's kind of my early existence. And I had always thought as a very young man that I would be a journalist. I loved and admired journalists. I thought they were, heroic. So I was studying journalism. I editing the paper, working part-time. And I was getting ready to apply for a scholarship at NAU, Northern Arizona University.
Uh-huh.
I had to put together all my clippings. And in doing that, I went back and was reading them all as I was putting them together. And I realized I was a really bad writer. Maybe I'm a nice guy or easy to get along with, so no one ever told me the thing that I needed to hear, which was, you're not that good. You're not that good a writer. And I actually even said to myself, if I didn't write this, I wouldn't keep reading this. So I had kind of a weird crisis at the time for a young guy, which was, I didn't have a plan B. What am I going to do?
Yeah.
And I went to Dale and told him my epiphany. And he said, you know what? At this time now, the video stores have exploded in a couple of
Yeah, I
years.
was going to say, Dale was right about video and yogurt.
He was right about video and yogurt.
Yeah.
Why are we not talking about him? And so I went back. He said, look, I'm super busy. We've got a couple of stores now. And my wife has had 2 kids and I'm never home. While you figure out what you want to do with your life, why don't you take this over for a while? And he gave me the keys to a, multiple store chain. And I learned everything. Basically he gave me film school and MBA course all at once. And I was, hiring and firing people, negotiating leases, doing the programming, paying the taxes, doing the payroll. I mean, on and on. And I just basically, I looked at it as like a business course without a net.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And it was all pretty low stakes stuff.
Yeah.
But I was just on my own.
But you dropped out of college and
dropped out of college. I didn't finish even that 2-year college. So
I know, but you know what? Sometimes I look back and think how lucky you were that you realized you were a shitty writer.
Yeah.
Right. One of my first jobs in my 20s, we had to do this thing where we had to write down what you did every day. It was this big leadership training course. I worked for a big company. And secretly, your boss had to do an evaluation of you. And when you were at the training, you opened this magic paper that had your boss's feedback on what you were going to do. And everybody else had these tomes of things. And my boss wrote, talk, talk, talk.
No kidding.
I was 22 and I was beating myself up all the time because I didn't write very well. I was terrible at the spreadsheet part. I was really worried that my file cabinet was disorganized. But I mean, what a gift.
Yeah.
To know that so early in your career.
Yeah. And I had time to pivot.
Yeah. And then you go to this video store where
Yeah.
that really puts your career into a whole different trajectory.
It did. And it actually just opened my eyes to all kinds of things, mostly just, like I said, all aspects of business. How did that movie get onto that tape and get into that shelf?
Right.
Things I would have no exposure to otherwise. And it was funny to me is like, I remember video stores were empty all day.
Yeah.
They did all the business between 5 and 7, basically. So all day, you got to watch movies all day. And I watched everything in the store all the time.
And so I will say, just because I've had the pleasure of working with you, like, yes, you are a film and TV and movie enthusiast. However, I think maybe what you realized too, that you loved business and you were actually quite good at it, right?
Yeah.
And so you were learning all this business stuff. But when was that moment where you're like, I'm actually a business guy?
I think it was a little bit out of frustration as a fan. I was always wondering, like, why don't these movies that I love, why don't they work? Like, why don't some of these little art house movies and, what it doesn't make sense. It didn't make sense to me that in the whole world, there weren't enough people to watch these movies to pay for a $100 videotape, on the shelf. And I really started going into why that was. And that realization that it wasn't that these were not great films.
Yeah.
It's just that in a very spread out population, people were only going to drive about 5 miles to your store. So there just weren't enough fans of those movies in that 5-mile radius for that movie to ever
Or go
work.
to a theater and see those things. I mean, I remember joining Netflix. My secret desire that I never, ever, ever told anybody was I was that art house movie gal, right? I mean, I would go to I lived in San Francisco and I would go to the Strand or whatever it was and watch and I thought my secret desire was, what if someday we were big enough that people would realize there's more to life than a shoot 'em up movie?
Well, I just thought the idea that it seems so exclusionary and elitist that these movies, you can only see them if you lived in New York and LA and Austin, so for me, it was like that idea of democratizing entertainment, but the practice of getting into trying to figure out how do I make this movie work? And the idea of realizing that it was the limited trade radius. So that's kind of business thinking.
Yeah, no, it is.
Right.
And then all those little pieces.
And so you're hanging out at the video stores. Dale's giving you the keys. And then what happens?
Well, the other thing too, I'd say that, again, piecing back how all these stuffs have contributed to what I'm doing now. The other thing I noticed was that you're working behind the counter. People are trying to pick out a movie to watch. And they would walk around the store for a long time. If anyone grew up in video stores, they remember you walk around and you flip it over, you read the box. I was surprised that people agonized over the decision of what to watch so much. And so I started doing just again my own little exercise of why is that? Why do you care so much about this? Why are you so worried about watching a bad movie? It might just happen, But I realized that people put a lot of stock behind the decision because money was limited. So $5 a night is a big deal for that movie. They want it to be great. The other one is oftentimes they were picking a movie for other people. And it really said something about them as to what they picked. They really wanted to pick a great movie. So it really was kind of defining who they were in a way that was so more important than I expected. So you learn the value of choosing and the value of helping people find the right thing, which feels like a low stakes decision, but actually emotionally, it's a fairly high stakes decision in the moment.
Yeah.
So that kind of absolute trade radius was a big one. Because I realized the value of the national footprint of Netflix back in the DVD by mail day.
Yeah.
And now the global footprint of Netflix that makes it possible to bring all those little niches to life finally. And then that choosing part, which is the only thing worse than a list of 100 movies is a list of 10,000 movies.
Right.
So, something to make sense of it is really critical too.
I remember one of our big innovations, very big innovations on the original website was this thing called Bob. And you just reminded me of Bob. Do you remember it, Ted?
I do.
And Bob was that Ted helped us. He's like, when people go in the store, the first thing they do is they pick up the video and they look at the back of the box.
B.O.B., back of box.
Bob, back of the box, right? And so that was the big innovation for a number of years that's now turned into, a snippet of a movie or what I love now is that it's more than a trailer. That you get that sort of gets you into the movie. But it's funny how much those things, seeped into the business that still is now.
So I ran those stores for a while. It was great. I really enjoyed it. I had to, at some point, get a grown-up job.
Uh-huh.
And I went to work in home video distribution with the company that was selling the videos to the video stores.
Yeah.
And I thought, when I heard about this job, this has got to be the greatest job of all time. You go around talking about movies to video store owners for 10 hours a day, which I really loved it. But after about 6 months, I got promoted to sales manager, then eventually general manager, then regional manager. And so it's $1 billion private company distributing movies to everyone, including Blockbuster. Became the exclusive distributor to Blockbuster. The business got very, very big, very, very fast. So it became a lot more about the logistics of distribution than it was about the movies itself. But I still had access to that thing that I love so much. In fact, I would get the advanced screeners, which made all the the grind of that work all worth it. And then after that business got very big, Blockbuster built their own distribution system and bumped us out. So this company called ETD, East Texas Distributing, eventually, contracted pretty dramatically. I spent the last year there basically shutting down the distribution centers and laying people off, and really not fun, not fun. And I wound up going back into video retail for a period of time for a company called West Coast Video. I had just joined. I was there for a little over a year. That was a dying company. I mean, it was not that video stores were also in trouble, but these particular stores were just really bad. We had bought another chain. We were trying to put them together, and it was chaos. So people were stealing, and the deals were terrible. And so I really was up to my eyeballs trying to save this business. And I get a call from Reed Hastings and asked me if I would come out and talk to him about Netflix.
So how did Reed hear about you? Do you know?
In that window of time at West Coast Video, I did a deal with Warner Brothers and Sony, Columbia Pictures at the time, but Sony, to revenue share DVDs, which had never been done before because DVDs were mostly tried to be a retail thing. Yeah. And we did it because we desperately needed cash. So I basically got the studios to give us the movies, and then we just paid them every time they rent because we needed the cash.
And Jessica, because we had no freaking clue about who was going to be successful in our roles. We were busily recruiting from vendors. Right? It's like, shit. I mean, we weren't going to hire anybody in Silicon Valley, right? It was the same time that we hired Leslie, our head of marketing, right? It was, okay.
Leslie and I started the exact same day.
And that's how we found him, right? It's like, who's done a deal with who and who knows who.
Yeah. And that deal got on the cover of Video Business Magazine.
Woo!
And I'm sure that's how Reed came to know it.
Yeah.
And I called Reed.
Call him up.
And so I was my very first e-commerce transaction was buying that Southwest Airlines ticket to come out and fly out and meet Reed.
Amazing.
And disco dancing with me.
Well, that was actually predated the disco dance because after that meeting, I was super intrigued by Reed.
Oh, right. You just met him first.
Yeah. It was laid out this vision for the future, which was remarkably close to what it is right now. I tell people all the time that when he said what Netflix was going to be, this was at a time when you couldn't watch video online. It was so expensive and so slow. And he may be crazy.
Yeah. And the screen that you watched it on was 4 inches by 4 inches.
That little tiny pop-up.
Yeah. And it buffered for the first time one of the engineers showed it to me. They're like, hey, give us your computer. We're going to show you a streaming video. I'm like, okay, when do I get it back? They're like, tomorrow. I said tomorrow. They're like, well, you know how long it takes to download a movie? I'm like, no. And so when they brought it back, it was in this little bitty thing, and I'm like, there is no fucking way I'm going to do this until I can wave my computer in front of the TV. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Et voila.
But Reed saw it.
But somebody had emailed me a South Park clip that took 7 days to open. I think it was. That was running through my head when he was talking about the vision. And he said to me, he goes, Ted, no, the internet is going to get twice as fast at half the price every 18 months. It's called Moore's Law. Yeah. And I kept nodding my head like I knew what Moore's Law was. Moore's Law. But then after a meeting, I just thought it was one of those great meetings. And I left and went back to work. And months go by, really. And he would check in every once in a while. And he happened to call me on a night. I was in Philadelphia. Cold Philadelphia, solving some hairy problem. And he finally said, hey, I really need someone in this role and I'm going to move on. But I just really want to know, why are you saying no? Why are you not wanting to do this? I go, I'll be honest with you. They really need me here. And I'm going through this whole thing. And it's like, I'm going. And he goes, oh, yeah, it does sound like they need you there. You know where else they need you? Feeding starving children. Why aren't you doing that? And I said, I love this guy. And I said, yes, on the phone.
That's so Reed.
Now, isn't that a Reed thing?
That's so
So
Reed. So that was it. That's what I said. Okay. I joined the company and I was the OG work from home guy because we didn't have an office in LA and I was working from home 2 days a week.
You were the future of work before it was even.
I was the future of work. Video stores, yogurt, and work from home.
Yeah.
It's all the light.
Until you went to that fabulous office on Wilshire Boulevard. That was just amazing.
Yeah, it was amazing.
Yeah, so that was how it led me to Netflix. It'll be 25 years ago,
Wow.
25 years in
It's
March.
crazy. Now you are co-CEO. And I think we get asked a lot of questions from our listeners about, do I need to go to college to be successful? Do I need to? And it's like, no, you don't. I mean, you are a real life story of that.
I think the only thing I feel like I missed by not going to college is the life experience parts, the relationship building, the camaraderie. I mean, all those kind of the networking, all that stuff.
Right.
The world is kind of cliquey. And I do find that there is, hiring cliques and there's management cliques.
But your clique is like Hollywood. So I feel like it all worked out for you.
It all worked out.
No, but just by hiring you, it helped me a ton because it helped with the legacy that, the best people aren't white guys from Harvard.
Yeah.
Right. And the best people don't have the perfect resumes. Yeah. And Reed wasn't totally like that, but he wasn't not like that. I mean, true. He was a Stanford grad and,
had breathed the rarefied air, as he said.
Yeah. But it was, Ted came at a time when we had no clue who to hire because nobody in the world did the jobs that we did. And what's interesting to me, and the question I want to ask you was, that happened over and over and over again. I mean, if we're going to stream, we have to be in the cloud. Who knows how to move half the world's internet bandwidth over the cloud? Nobody.
Things I don't have done before, yeah.
Right. I mean, how are we going to work from the studios? I have to tell you a story and then we'll work backwards. So during the writer's strike, Jessica and I are talking to each other. I'm like, thank God we don't have our old jobs. Can you imagine how sucky that would be right now? Like trying to do HR through the writer's strike. And I swear to God, at the same time, both of us went, but wouldn't it be cool to kind of figure it out? Like we could start over with writer compensation.
Yeah.
It's like automatically both of our brains went to, yeah, but we could rethink that. That would be so interesting. So tell me for some of those big events in your career at Netflix, how did you learn? I mean, I know how I learned to do that, which was just stepping off the cliff all the time. But what were some of those cliffs for you? And where did you have sort of the big ahas?
It's funny you use the word cliff because the one I remember the most early on was one of the things we had when we were growing is we always had this inventory problem because we didn't have a lot of cash.
Right.
And we had to have enough copies of the movies that people wanted to make it a satisfying thing. And mostly it was the new movies that you needed a bunch of copies in the front and then you didn't need that many later. Mm-hmm. And then there's the staple movies, the Top Gun and Animal House and those movies that every time you added members, you needed more copies of those movies.
Right.
And we were going through this period of time, as you know, Patty, remember that at different times, different people managed this thing. Our content was buying DVDs, basically.
Yeah, right.
And we're buying it pretty much from Costco and Best Buy.
That's right.
So one of the first things I did was I got us direct with the studios so we could buy directly from the studios and get some better buying terms and prices. But we still have the same problem, which is how do we keep up and project the demand and all those things? So, we're in a tech company, so we have a lot of people doing lots of sophisticated things in Excel spreadsheets. But so basically, it was one of these things I said, I'm sitting there talking to Reed about this dilemma, basically, of these top 500 movies and how do we keep them better in stock? And I said, it'd be interesting to do would be, why don't we just buy a bunch more than we need? And that way we can see it as it,
as we use it.
Down,
yeah.
And we get down, we'll see when we need more and all that. And he said, yeah, sure. And he walked away and I did it. I cut the purchase orders and we buy all these movies. They all come in. We are really struggling with cash at that moment.
Right.
So the CFO at the time says, why did Ted buy all these movies? Reed comes down to say, am I losing my mind? What are you doing? And I said, remember we were talking about, you said, and he stopped me right in my tracks and said, you are not allowed to let me drive us off the cliff.
Yeah.
This is your decision, not mine. And it stuck with me like it was yesterday. And I think about it in almost every decision I make.
Yeah. Right.
Yeah.
And by the way, that's fucking scary.
Mhm. Yeah.
Right. Knowing you're behind the wheel and there's a
100%.
potential cliff and neither one of you knows the road ahead.
No,
Right.
and you also, there's a lot of things that you've got to really look at and say, what is the ripple effect of this purchase order? You know?
Yeah. I want to talk about that for 1 second, though, because, I work with a lot of founders and a lot of startups, and there gets a point when there are a couple hundred people and they've scaled some, and then people kind of stop jumping off the cliff, right? So I was talking to a company yesterday and they're like, nobody wants to take responsibility for making the decision, which is what we're taking. And so they just don't, right? And so how did you keep jumping off the cliff as you grew?
One of those things is I found that it's one thing to be wrong, but if you're wrong for the right reasons, that's okay.
Yeah.
But if you're just perpetually wrong,
That's bad.
that's not good.
Yeah.
So I try to find out, what are the outcomes of this decision? And if they're made for the right reasons, then you've got to kind of live with the outcomes sometimes. That you can control some things and you can't control everything.
Right.
So the things that you can control, know as much as you can about it, but you have to make decisions with the information you have in front of you.
The other thing about that story is from the other side of it, I remember Reed's learning from that story, which was I have to trust him to care more and know more about this situation than I do. Because, you were always that person that he didn't think he knew better than, except for when he did. Right? Because, it was one of those like, don't drive me off the cliff, but I trust you to own this.
I did have the luxury, I'd say, of knowing the things that he maybe didn't know as well.
Yeah.
Which, he's pretty brilliant. He pretty much knew everything else. So it was really hard to find one of those things. But yet he knew enough to challenge me. He asked very smart questions about things, in that space and how it would affect, the rest of the business or how it would affect the rest of the company. So in that way, it was a very effective way of managing something that you yourself don't have that much expertise in.
And I think, Jessica, for your founders, right? One of the things that all three of us learned from our experience there was, and then as we became leaders, to model that behavior.
Exactly.
Right. To be overt about taking risks, be overt about saying, it's your job, right? And go do it to the best of your ability. I trust you to either make the right decision or make the wrong decision and learn a whole hell of a lot from it.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I would say, there's a series of those kind of decisions and events that happen up until 2012 with the House of Cards deal.
Yeah.
And you'll both remember that there was in a world of folks that said, hey, we've got this problem solved in a spreadsheet. Which was more watching, more members.
Right.
Get as much content as you can to get more watching.
Right.
The best way to get that is non-exclusively because the prices are lower. And that was the prevailing sentiment. And I just remember even back to the 1999 conversation with Reed saying that I don't think that a programming organization can win without distinguishing itself in the programming. And if everyone has the same stuff, it's just going to be a race to the bottom on price. But in the meantime, we had to get big and had to get to scale. So getting a lot of things at good economics did make sense.
Right.
But then the thing that stuck with me all the time was it didn't matter how many hours I watched HBO. I valued certain hours more than others. Now, ultimately, I had to watch it enough to value the subscription every month. But certain things I valued a lot more than other things. And nothing in this spreadsheet was weighted for that. So the idea of having something exclusive, having something meaningful, and we, by happenstance, got the pitch from the producing company for House of Cards. We did a bunch of research to determine that House of Cards could be a big hit on Netflix.
Yep.
And
checked all the boxes.
Pulled the trigger on, a $100 million investment in the TV.
Yeah, it was $100 million.
And right after we had the Quickster debacle and we had separated streaming from DVD. So the whole company was kind of tentative at that time. And I remember it's like, okay, big guy,
Here we go.
Here we go.
Well, what I remember is that because basically the conversation with Reed after the deal was done was something along the lines of, why'd you do that? And
After you'd already
Yeah.
done it.
after
Yeah.
it was done,
Yeah.
I said, I think that if I'm wrong, we will have overspent on one show. And if I'm right, we will fundamentally change the course of the
And
business.
you did.
And that's just kind of classic risk reward. And he goes, I like it. And that was it. And we barely talked about it
Yeah.
again after that. We were just in the original content.
And you were
business.
right. You're kind of like Dale.
Yogurt, video stores, work from home,
Original
house and
content.
cars.
So how are you like that now? And how are you different?
So one thing that was really helpful for me in my current position as co-CEO is there's a lot of things that I oversee, one or two layers removed, that I don't know how to do. I don't know the answer, but I really focus on knowing the question and trying to get to the place that, as you know, Patty, from the beginning of the company, very much an engineering culture, very much data driven. And I think if I look back at it, the thing I brought in was a little bit more intuition
Yeah.
and gut.
Yeah.
And really kind of being tenacious about it, because it's very easy to get shut down with data when you're just saying, hey, I just think this is the thing.
Yeah. Well, that was the battle or tension that you had to navigate, forever and probably still today.
My saying from it is have an opinion, take a stand, and be right most of the time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And we could care less about your opinion unless you're willing to take a stand.
And you were.
And you have to be able to do it in a place that will say, hey, I don't know what he's talking about, but there's something there.
Or I don't know what you're talking about. What leads you to believe that's true? Because I don't. And that internalizing, I don't know what you're talking about. Right. And you clearly do. So help me understand. That's the context. And you were such a driver in that part of the culture, Ted, about context, because there was such a tension between the two cultures. And I'm sure there still is, but it kind of has the weight going the other way.
Yeah. I feel like there's an interesting thing now when I look back at those times. I'd look at the decisions and why you make them. But even staying in Los Angeles and not moving to Los Gatos at the beginning, it was more of a recognition of these are slightly different cultures.
Yeah.
And it wouldn't be helpful for us to have that kind of Silicon Valley culture jammed into LA or the LA culture jammed up north. That would never happen, by the way. The organ rejection would be violent. So when I look at that and think, well, they gave us the ability to build two expertises at the same time, two respectful ones too, two organizations that were quite different, but were very respectful of each other and very curious about each other in a way to figure out that you can be a great entertainment company and have great technology. And you can be a great technology company and have great entertainment, but no one did it before us.
Nobody did.
And I still think it's a very elusive thing for most companies.
I do too. I mean, I might be biased, but I think, from a technology perspective and an entertainment perspective, like others have tried, they haven't quite gotten as sophisticated as we are.
Yeah. I mean, companies, like you said, great companies, they build themselves to squeeze out things like, that would challenge the operating style or operating vision. And for us, we've always embraced it as, hey, what if it's the next big thing?
Yeah.
What if this is the next big thing?
So you, just so the listeners know, were our chief content officer for the majority of your journey at Netflix. And now, the last few years, you have been CEO and co-CEO with Reed, and then co-CEO now with Greg. So tell us the major shift for you as a leader from being the chief content officer to being the CEO.
Yeah, so there's a lot of similarities and then there's a lot of complete, different things. But I think the similar part is you sit in a room, someone pitches you an idea for a movie or a show, and you have got to deliver an amazing season of television from that pitch. So they lay out a framework, and then it's all about putting the right people in the right jobs. And to do that, it's all about getting the right level of decision making that goes into that, like how much creative guidance can you give Or is it better just to get the best people and give them tools and get out of their way? It sure served us well at Netflix. So we kind of applied that same thing with our showrunners and creators. And then you have to help them, get this vision across the finish line over and over and over again. And as I move away from that for the business itself, it's kind of the same thing, which is you got something we're doing that's new. Like if it's live streaming, which doesn't seem like that novel, and television's been live since the beginning. But for our technology stack, it was quite novel. Or if it's advertising or creating ads here and selling into advertising or games, these are all things that are kind of started at the pitch stage, just like a show or a film did. And then you have to build the teams around them and support those teams and make sure that they have the right context, the right vision, the right set of metrics to follow, the right accountability, all those things over and over again. So it's applying those same principles to things that cut across every aspect of the business around the world. I think if you told us before we made Lilyhammer and House of Cards that we were going to be making hit shows from Germany and India and Spain and France all at the same time, I wouldn't have believed you. I wouldn't have believed you. But these practices actually have worked over and over and over again in all these different elements of the business. And I'm confident that they will in games and they will in ads and they will in live. So going from not being able to do any live streaming on Netflix to Christmas Day, we're going to stream 2 NFL football games.
I know.
The other beauty of that story is all of those things that you just mentioned are things we rejected. Right? Or things that we said no to. And
Many a times.
What an incredible learning to not say, oh, we tried that, it didn't work.
Yeah.
Right? It's so deep in the culture not to say that. It's kind of like, you go and wash your mouth out with soap if you say something like that, right? It's like, you cannot say, we tried it and it didn't work.
You know what's funny? We did a thing, I'm sure you guys remember, there was the DVD rack. Remember the DVD rack that sat on top of your TV to hold your 3 discs?
Yeah.
And when that came along, we thought that was pretty genius. And then, of course, it was a big dud. And we referred to it, though, for years after. Like, every idea, that's this year's DVD rack.
And I kept one forever in my office, and then I would just hold it up, right? Especially because it was Reed's idea, and he really loved designing it. And he would come in with something crazy, and I would just hold it up and go,
But like I said, and sometimes the people who are doing the thing you're doing now are not going to be the people that can do the next thing. And when we got into doing international television, we got into doing unscripted. We got into doing co-productions. We had to keep adding and layering and expanding. And then those teams have to really gel together. So it's that setting the big vision thing really matters. And being able to have a history of delivering on it, I think really helps too. Because like I said, but when we did House of Cards, it wasn't that we were debating whether or not to do originals. We were debating whether or not to have exclusive programming.
At all.
Right?
At all. Scary.
And many debates.
Many of debates. And I just think, like I said, the thing that I will be forever grateful to Reed for the examples that he set around very core things, like him kind of creating the co-CEO model for he and I, and then carrying it on with me and Greg. For me, that's Reed probably 10 years ago thinking about succession.
Well, it was.
And how important it is to a business. And what I tie that to is the very first conversation back in 99, the first thing he said was, we're going to build a company that's going to outlive me. So if you think that, right, that already told me so much about his mindset that I didn't really pick up on at that time about things like, well, if you're going to do that, who's going to do it after you? So you have to be constantly thinking about that.
So if you're a CEO or you're a CEO founder, what's your advice for them?
You've got to bring people into your vision. Nobody knows it better than you. No one's more passionate about it than you. Nobody, wakes up thinking about it with more intensity than you. But you can't deliver it on your own. You need a bunch of people who are better at you at all those things that you don't know how to do. And you need to be respectful of those things, and you need to listen. And so you have to empower people to make decisions. And they're going to make some bad ones. And you have to stick with them and make sure they're not just all about bad decisions, that that they win more than they lose. And that they're set leaders, and they take your leadership example and put it into practice so you can scale. You can't do this alone. You have to scale. You can only do that by inspiring people, empowering people, trusting people, and holding people accountable. And that eventually becomes your only job.
It does become your only job. And Ted, you just gave me goosies.
Me too.
That's a good note to end on. Ted, we love you.
It is mutual. I love the show. I love the two of you. And I love what you're doing for
Yeah,
folks.
thank you. Oh, will you come back?
I will for sure. It was fun.
All right, good.
Love you to pieces. Thanks for listening to TruthWorks. This episode was produced and edited by Megan Hayward and Mick Finnegan. Thank you, Kathleen Speckert, and the whole Edit Audio team.